Hi, this is Dr. P to try to answer the question of what makes a game a good game for tabletop face-to-face tournaments. In other words, if you were going to design a game and wanted it to be played in tournaments at conventions, what characteristics would you choose? Now, tournaments can be competitive or they can just be an excuse for playing games at a convention, sort of a way to find other players of like mind. Many tournaments you'll have several games for each player, in other words multiple heats, rather than a single elimination. But at least some of the players in the tournament will be genuinely interested in winning and they don't want any screw-ups. So, I've tried to come up with a list of characteristics for games that would be suitable for tournaments with those things in mind. And here is the list. It's essentially 3 things. And I'll go over each one individually. What's the ideal game length? This is going to vary according to the nature of the game. Serious games are going to be longer than casual or jokey games or funny games. I'd guess half an hour per player for serious games, so 2.5 hours for 5 players. But you have to keep in mind, some people play in tournaments to play games that are too long or too involved to play at home. What about casual games? Well, maybe 15 minutes per player. But if you have 5 players, that's 1 hour and 15 minutes, and that might be a bit long. So you might want to specify a maximum of 1 hour. Now there are exceptions to this. Axis and Allies in various forms can be an 8-hour game. Britannia is 4 to 5, History of the World is 6, Advanced Civilization is 8. But these and other games like them are all old-time games that don't attract a lot of new tournament players. It's the same dudes playing year after year. And you rarely see new tournaments set up for these games. So there are exceptions. Another characteristic you want of a tournament game, fairly obviously, is that it's hard to cheat. Well, there's 2 kinds of cheating. There's deliberate cheating and there's accidental cheating. Accidental as in you do something against the rules without intending to. Now, the more fiddly the game, the easier it is to accidentally cheat. For example, in many Euro-ish games, there are lots of transactions that you do where you're moving markers, paying money, playing cards, and so forth. It's easier to screw up. And of course, it's also easier to cheat deliberately in those circumstances. One competitive player told me he wouldn't play some of these games, such as Terraforming Mars, in tournaments because it was too easy for players to screw up. Now, I've seen lots of games where people are fiddling around with status tracks and money, and I see lots of opportunities to screw up, and I believe I've seen a number of cases where people screwed up, whether it was deliberate or accidental. Of course, someone else might say, well, dice rolling can be quite sloppy and open to argument. So if you avoid dice, you can eliminate a problem. And that's also true, although simple house rules about dice, for example, if it goes on the floor, it doesn't count, can eliminate many of the problems you get with dice. But even cards. Some people can manipulate decks of cards, even in Magic the Gathering, and cheat that way. And there have been some high-profile cases of people caught cheating because they were being videoed and somebody finally noticed that they were cheating when they shuffled cards. Avoiding lots of transactions, I think, is more important than any of these. But transactions are common in corporate management style games. Hidden information can make it easy to cheat as well, especially, say, if you have different movement rates or capabilities. So I have a number of vaguely Stratego-like games, and I require any piece moved farther than the lowest common denominator to be revealed. And all revealed pieces stay revealed for the rest of the game. I don't do the memory business because I don't want the game to be about memory. I want it to be about strategy and tactics. The third thing is flexibility in the number of players. Now, it's expected that some tourney games, maybe many tourney games, are only going to be for 2 players, just as was true of nearly all classical games. But people like to play games nowadays where there are more than 2 players. and it works best in a tournament when the number can vary. That's so that the last people registering can still play even if they don't amount to a particular number. There are examples of fail, and they are older games. For example, diplomacy requires exactly 7, advanced civilization is 6 or possibly 7 but not fewer, Britannia is 4, which at least is a fairly low number. So, questions of scalability can come up. Changing the number of players can also drastically change what the game is about. For example, there are 3-player variants of diplomacy, but they're really different from the original. Also, it's often really hard or even impossible to make a decent 2-player version of a game for more than 2. I tried for years to make a 2-player version of Britannia, but it just didn't work. Usually, the 2-player game will be much different from the multiplayer version for lack of anything like negotiation. And many games with more than 2 players do involve negotiation, even if it's only trying to persuade someone that you're harmless and somebody else isn't. We also have, in games of conflict, the 3-player problem, the petty diplomacy problem, it's been called. One player who thinks he or she can't win can often determine which other player wins. Now, that's not a problem with parallel competitions that are typical of non-war games, that is, games where you have little you can do to hinder or affect the other players. Obviously, there's no ideal tournament game, but there are many not well suited, even though some of those are often in tournaments. Thanks for listening.